Welcome everyone to the Fantasy Phoenix podcast, here to give you tips for NBL SuperCoach. In round 3, we saw some upsets, overtime, near suspensions after some fights, and of course, some great SuperCoach performances. Here's how I went for the round, scoring 419 points, and we halved our rank again into just outside the top 3,000. There's still a long way to go, but if we can continue to halve our rank each week, we should hit first come round 15-16, so hopefully we can keep it up. Jack White was again fantastic and continues to prove why we held him. Montrezl Harrell with the 61 was serviceable. Not the ideal captain choice, but definitely not a disaster this week, unlike the first two. When deciding who to bench at the 5 spot, I was a bit worried that Rob Lowe would get outperformed by Cam Oliver in that Brisbane matchup, but he more than doubled him, so very happy with that starting call. Kendrick Davis was an absolute beast, and Shea Ili was good enough in his one game without Delhi to carry him for the second game with him for the round. In some injury news, the Wildcats were without both Dylan Windler and Ty Webster for their round 3 clashes with an ankle and a calf injury respectively. Speaking of calf injuries, Tanner Groves missed the Taipan's second game against Melbourne due to a calf complaint, but he is expected to return for round 4, but we need to keep a very close eye on this as it could provide us with a couple of nice cheapies if he's set to miss again. Luckily for owners, both Will Magnay and Montrezl Harrell escaped suspension due to their indiscretions in round 3. Will Magnay did underperform though, as it came out after the fact that he was a game time decision for their second match due to having the flu, so his owners and particularly captainers should feel pretty lucky that he managed to scrape out that score. Round 4 is a smaller one with only 3 teams on the double: Adelaide, Cairns and Sydney, but none of them back it up next week. Strategies will vary a bit more this week and teams will start to differentiate as we look forward. With that in mind, let's take a look at some potential trade options in our buy, sell, keep and avoid segment. Buy are players that I think are good options to trade in if you don't already have them. Sell are players I think are good options to trade out if you do own them. Keep are players that are being traded out by others but I think you should consider keeping, and avoid are players that are being traded in by others but I think you should consider avoiding. Here's how we went last week. Montrezl Harrell was alright, he got into a tussle, put up some numbers, but just didn't quite hit that ceiling. Like I mentioned last week though, his floor looks pretty safe and that's exactly what he did. He put up a nice 61 points and gained 22,000 in the process. Watching him in person, he has the attributes but is definitely lacking that game fitness and still adjusting to the league. Our sell, Derek Walton Jr. outscored his double last week with just the one game for 38 points. Where was that when you were my captain last week, Derek? Our keep Cam Oliver's 16 points was pretty underwhelming in a one-sided game that was definitely not reflected on the final scoreboard. But he is very valuable this week for those of us that held on to him. Our avoid Delhi did end up missing that first game due to the birth of his child, and he scored a 20 in the second game for a slight loss of 4.9k. Moving on to this week. Our buy, Taran Armstrong. It looked like there might have been a slight issue, so as long as he's all clear to play the first game, this one is a bit of a no-brainer. He was in our preseason teams before injury derailed the start of his year, but he slotted right back into the Taipans lineup without missing a beat and scored a very solid 58 over the double. With 2 doubles in the next 3 weeks and a nice price rise coming his way, Armstrong is top of my shopping list this week. Sell, Shea Ili. He has served his purpose in our teams with that early Melbourne schedule. He gave us some up and down scoring for the first few weeks. With Melbourne on back-to-back singles and the man that we just spoke about being available as the perfect downgrade option, it's time to move on Shea Ili. Keep. For the second week in a row, Cam Oliver. He was unders last week, but as I mentioned, that was in the blowout game. The Kings have the double this week and 3 out of the next 4 as well. He's never played his former side, but he averages over 40 against Adelaide, with only 1 score under 30 in all of those matches. I will definitely be keeping Space Cam and confident playing him on court. I was also surprised to see Will Magnay so highly traded out. I would be keeping him if you went that option, with Tasmania being one of only 2 teams on the double next week. Avoid Sam Wardenberg. A lot of people are scarred from his efforts in our teams last year, including myself, and although he does look better this year, I just don't think it's enough at that price. In 2 of his last 3 games, Tanner Groves has either missed or played single-digit minutes. He's got a break-even of 50, and I'm not sure how much more he'll go over that. You can definitely hold him if you own him, but I just think that there are better options around that price or cheaper that should be looked at instead. With only 3 teams on the double, the options are shortened in terms of captaincy this week, but there's still some pretty big performers. And to be realistic, there's probably only 4 guys we're looking at. Starting with Jalen Adams. We've already seen the ceilings Adams could put up, and we can hopefully look forward to more of that with a couple of nice matchups this week. He averages just under 35 against the two opponents and has only gone under 30 once in 12 matches combined against them. He should be a very safe floor captain this week with a chance to go big again. Xavier Cooks. He proved many wrong and is smashing it out to start the year. He fills the stat sheet with lots of different ways to access those SuperCoach points for us. He also performs very well against this week's opponents, averaging 35 and getting a double-double on average 50% of the time against the two combined. He scores well against Adelaide, but he goes very, very well against Cairns. So if you do have him and do captain him, don't be discouraged by a lower score in the first game, because there's a very good chance he'll make up for it in game number 2. Montrezl Harrell. I backed him in last week and he was very serviceable with that 61. It shows that he's got that great floor. He has the attributes for the high ceiling score, but it just hasn't come together yet. I think that him paired with Humphries actually is beneficial. If he can just play a little bit more game time and get that fitness up there, he can really push those numbers. And lastly, his teammate Kendrick Davis has been a very solid option to start the year, and he showed us last week he can definitely be a SuperCoach stud. We now know that he can hit those ceiling scores, and he is shown to have a pretty good floor. Just be wary of his matchups this week against the defensive guard beasts in Melbourne and Sydney. Of these 4 guys, he would be the lowest priority in my opinion, but if he's your best option or you've got that gut feeling he goes again, I wouldn't be too concerned putting the C on him. Last week, I went aggressive and used my first boost to trade out Derek Walton Jr., Darius Days, and Angus Glover to Kendrick Davis, Montrezl Harrell, and Ben Henschel. I would have liked Henschel to have scored a bit more for the boost, but we wanted him for that cash gen and he's going to be kept for quite some time. One of the reasons that I did pull that trigger was I've had seasons in the past where someone has just been a cheap bench option and I've kind of let them rot there, but they don't generate that cash and it does come back to buy you in the end. Because of those trades, I've got a nice little bundle of cash, but I do need to have enough for the trades I want to make next week, so I need to be wary, and that means I'm more than likely looking at some cheaper options this week. Unless we get any injury news and Taron Armstrong is not fit to play in that first game, Shea Illy to him is locked in. Then the second trade is most likely going to be Rob Lowe or Lockie Ulbrich out to someone cheap, perhaps a Kyron Galloway, that I can either play this week on the double if Tanner Groves misses, or if I'm a bit concerned that he's still not going to quite hit the ceiling that he has so far, I can just play Jack White instead of him. That leaves me with a lot of money next week, which I'll very much be able to do the 2 moves that I want to do, and potentially even a nice third one if I decide to boost as well. Because of that, in terms of captaincy, I'm probably going to go with Montrezl Harrell again. Hopefully he can at least hit that floor score, but it would be nice if he could pump the numbers up a little bit higher for us. Thank you everyone for tuning in. Hopefully this has helped with your teams leading into round 4. If it has, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. A big thank you to everyone that has hit that sub button so far. We smashed through 50, we've hit 75, and next stop, 100 subscribers. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave them down below, or you can reach me on Twitter at @FantasyPhoenix_. Good luck for round 4. Be sure to look a few weeks ahead, so don't leave yourself short for those important trades that we need to make next week. As always, remember to trust your gut, have fun, and we'll see you in the next one.